Okay, today we are looking at a source comparison question. Woo! So it's about which source is more useful as evidence about old age pensions. Now, with a usefulness question, there is a golden rule for sources. And that golden rule is all sources are useful. Some are just more useful than others. Everyone always forgets that. They think that usefulness is about reliability. Even an unreliable source might be useful to someone studying a topic because it shows us perhaps what the opposition said, even if it was a lie. What did people who were lying think about a topic? Okay, and the other thing that we want to highlight is old age pensions itself. So hopefully you all remember it is brought by the Pension Act in 1908 to over 70s and provides financial help to about 500,000 people. There are lots of restrictions for you to be able to claim it, including how many years you lived in Britain, how long you had been working for. But still, 500,000 people shows us that it was an incredible success for the Act. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the mark scheme. Okay, to hit level 4, top 7 marks, you've got to be able to have a good understanding of the sources and some factual knowledge. You have to be able to read between the lines or inferences about the sources themselves. So whether that's you understanding that perhaps there's a double meaning to the source, or perhaps you understand that it's a propaganda piece and it might be not totally truthful. If you can show that, if you can explain that, that's gonna be the way for you to get into that level 4. And of course, you've got to actually respond to whether or not it's a useful source to understand specifically the question about old age pensions. To get those extra 2 marks, to get into that level 5, though, your understanding of the source has to be really sophisticated. Now, what that really means is that you can talk about many different aspects of the source, many different ways that you could read between the line about the source. And of course, you've got to have some really good factual knowledge. You can't be wishy-washy. You can't say there were around this many people. You can't say perhaps it was this. I think it was around 1900. You've got to be really precise with your knowledge. Now, making inferences from the publication of the source, that means you can read between the line about the source, but it could be also about the author of the source, whoever's made it. So you've got to look at the caption and just produce a very sophisticated evaluation about the usefulness of the source. So you've got to really directly say which one's more useful, why. So, source B. Straight away, look at the caption. It's from a Liberal Party pamphlet. So you should be thinking right away that the Pension Act's brought by the Liberal Party, so it could be a little bit biased. And when you look at it, you will see that actually it is a propaganda poster. It's all about promoting and explaining the old age pensions. But that doesn't mean it's not useful. It can be very useful for understanding old age pensions. And actually, if you read it, it's very useful. It tells us when it started to be paid in 1909 on New Year's Day. It tells us how many people they thought they would that would be claiming the pensions, about 500,000 people. And it tells you the age that you could get it. It then told you more specific details about who qualified for it. Depending on their income, they'd be able to qualify for the pension. It also told you those who could not get it, and it told you that it was not going to be paid the way that the poor law, which elderly people detested because it meant going to a workhouse, which were awful places. And so this was really a great departure for elderly people. They really liked that pensions were separate from the poor law, and it was in fact to be paid through the post office and a local pension committee, and they were unconnected with the poor law. So this source tells us quite a lot, and the reason why it's not just an information leaflet, it is a propaganda poster, is because of this bottom part. It says, what the Liberals do is better than what the Tories promise. You've got to remember the Tories are one of their main political rivals. There's Labour Party, but they're still small. Tory Party is the second biggest after the Liberal Party, and they're promising to also help the poor. So the Liberals are competing for those votes. They want to make sure that they can win future elections, and this is the way, by making people happy, by giving them old age pensions. So overall, yes, it is biased. It is a propaganda poster, but very useful for giving us many details about the Pension Act. Now let's take a look at source C. Again, look at the caption. It is written by a labor-supporting newspaper. So, of course, it's going to be biased. They are a rival political party to the Liberal Party. They want to appeal to the poor much more than the Liberals are doing. So in a newspaper, and it's called A Pitiful Pension Story. So straight away, pitiful means probably quite negative about pensions. Now, if with your knowledge, you should be able to remember that Labour would definitely be supportive of pensions, but they didn't think that the Pension Act was good enough. They wanted to go further. Let's actually read the story now. So, an inquest was held by the East London coroner yesterday into the death of Emma Stevens, age 69. The woman's husband, a labourer, also age 69, stated that recently he had not been able to give her enough food. They were behind with their rent, and his wife had said she was afraid the landlord was going to turn them out into the street. Her husband sobbed as he told the coroner that these were his wife's last words. They had refused outdoor relief or the workhouse because he and his wife did not want to lose out on the old age pension. The coroner said that this was a case where the Old Age Pension Act had actually harmed old people. This reporter had observed many such cases in the last few months. So what it's referring to is the fact that some elderly people were worried that they wouldn't qualify for the pension if they had been using help from the workhouse, which was the poor law. And in fact, they were about to turn 70, and when they turned 70, if they were actually already getting help from the workhouse with the outdoor relief or the workhouse, then they wouldn't be able to qualify for the pension. So this story's highlighting that there were some elderly people who were really struggling before they could turn 70, but they couldn't really get any help because they really wanted that pension. So this is talking about how Pension Act is too weak and should be for younger elderly people. Okay, 70 was quite high when you consider the average life expectancy. It was about late 40s, 50 for the poor class. Now we're going to take a look at a model answer. Now, as I stated, the golden rule for usefulness, utility of sources, is that all sources are useful. Just some are more useful than others. But remember the question that it's about how useful is it to study the old age pensions. So let's take a look. This person has obviously thought about that golden rule I just said. So they've right away stated, overall, I think although both of these sources are very biased, they are extremely useful as historical evidence. So note that yes, they have here mentioned biased, but it doesn't mean that it really affects their answer. They're focusing on the question, which is about usefulness. And it is not really possible to say that one is more useful than the other, because they both provide evidence of the same thing, that welfare had become a political battleground in the early 1900s. So this person has been able to really make great inferences, reading between the lines. They've been able to find what was common about both of them. Both of them were talking about different political parties that were rivals to the Liberals. Although one is made by the Liberals, they talk about the Tories and they're attacking them. And then the other source, the one we just saw, was by a Labour-leaning newspaper. And so it's being used, pensions is being used as a political football for the different parties. Now, here, the way they've organized it, and this would give you top marks, the way they've organized it is by then having one paragraph that will talk about the source B, evaluating it, talking about possibly a little bias, but really focusing on how useful it is, the things that you can get out of the source. And then they do the same thing for source C. Okay, so here they talk about how it provides us with really strong evidence about the rivalry between the Liberal and Tory parties in this period. It tells us that Liberals depended on leaflets to be able to promote themselves, to promote their acts. We can see that the Liberals were really trying to hype up the positive aspect of their reform, specifically the Old Age Pension Act, and to try to get public opinion behind them. Okay, and they're emphasizing that they're the ones who could do this, no one else. And source C is useful because even though it's by a source, just like source B, it tells us again that it's being used as a political tool to be able to fight between Liberal and Labour parties. It also shows us that it's pulling on the emotions with a sad story. It doesn't have data and facts and figures like maybe source B does, but it's using an anecdotal a story as evidence, trying to make us feel emotionally against the Pension Act, to make us feel like it's not good enough. So it's clearly designed to take one case and use it to make the Liberals look bad for setting the age of the pension at 70. The fact that Labour thought it was way too high considering the average life expectancy. It is doing this to get people to support Labour, as it is a pro-Labour paper. So they are addressing that bias, and it's good. You can bring it in, and you should. Just don't focus on the bias aspect. Just focus on what can you get out of the source, how useful is the source for studying old age pensions. And you can talk about how in their manifesto, some factual knowledge here, in the Manifesto of Labour, they had proposals for measures like labour exchanges and national insurance, both aimed at winning working class support. So this is the key group of people that all three parties, but specifically the Liberal Party, which is in government, and the Labour Party are fighting votes with. So with that, I think now you'd be able to go back to that question and directly compare the two sources right from the get-go, or you can do it at the end as well, but directly state which one you think might be more useful. You can argue that they're both just as useful. Remember that someone who is trying to get good evidence for any topic is going to need more than one source. So that is actually a really good way of getting a top answer, is by highlighting the fact that no source can be more useful. All sources are useful as evidence, and you'd want to use these two and even more to get a full understanding about old age pensions. Okay, good luck with the question.